Hey guys, welcome back to another deep dive here. Today I want to take a closer look at AMD Advanced Micro Devices. I know if you have been following my channel, I probably have tons of videos of AMD, but I don't believe I have a complete deep dive on this company where we can learn so much about it in just one video. So today that's what I really want to focus, do this deep dive on AMD, kind of take a closer look at where their opportunities lie, most of their products, right? There are even kind of PE ratios based on future earnings expectations. And then tomorrow, do expect another video. I am going to take a closer look at TSMC and do an earnings overview, more of a deep dive on earnings and kind of showcase what we might be seeing in the overall semiconductor market right now. So we can see AMD Advanced Micro Devices is ticker AMD, sitting at $110 right now with a market cap of 178. Unfortunately, right now, if you do look at this company's PE ratio, sitting near that 500. Right here in Google, we can see PE ratios roughly 459. We're going to take a closer look at current fiscal year estimations next year and 2 years from now. We can see these PE ratios are not as bad as they seem. So kind of let's just start off by looking at the fundamentals. I do believe looking at a quick look at the balance sheet and a lot of the fundamental numbers can kind of just put us at ease, and then we can kind of relax to see, hey, look, this is definitely a strong company with strong financials. Now we can definitely pay attention to what this company has to offer. So right now, cash flow from operations in the trailing 12 months is roughly $3 billion. Great. We like to see that positive cash flow from operation. It also has more cash flow from operations than total long-term debt. I do want to say right now we are seeing this weakness in the semiconductor market, right, where we're seeing a bit of over inventory correction, which is hurting the consumer side. AMD definitely has a lot of consumer products, so that bit of a slowdown is definitely hitting their cash flow from operations. I do believe once things start to pack up, we're going to start to see this start to trend back up how it was in 2020, in 2021, and 2020, early 2022. Cash and short-term investments, this company has roughly $6 billion ready to go. I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to start to see maybe some smaller acquisitions from AMD or some stronger buybacks. I believe maybe more acquisitions in the near future, smaller companies for AMD to kind of increase maybe some of their semiconductor opportunities. But overall, we can see financially this company is stable, positive cash flow, a lot of cash and short-term investments compared to its overall debt. Now, I want to take a closer look at this company's revenue, and I actually want to look at its current revenue as well. So, revenue at the moment is roughly $23.6 billion. That was its most recent fiscal year, right? For this current fiscal year, AMD's revenue is not expected to grow. It's pretty much expected to be flat. Analysts are expecting roughly a 23 billion. It's actually expected to decrease about 500 million. The main reason, like I mentioned, is that slowdown in the over inventory correction market that we're seeing right now. So there's not much growth expected this year. But now revenue estimated for the next fiscal year, we do see roughly $27.45 billion. That's over a 10, maybe closer to a 15% growth. That's where we like to see AMD, right? Still growing. I do believe, though, to some extent, analysts might be underestimating AMD, especially with all its data center products. So I think right now these are underestimations in my opinion, but obviously we will have to wait in the future to see how things go from here. For the 2 fiscal years from now, revenue estimation is expected to be roughly 31.1 billion, another roughly 10 to 15% year-over-year growth. So we can see right now AMD is still a growth story, is still expected to grow over double digits, over 10% for the next few years. And I do believe that's going to remain the case as we continue to innovate in technology, right? So overall, great growth opportunity as well. Now, if we take a closer look at earnings per share, I also want to look at earnings per share let's look annually right now. Earnings per share basics. So we can see in the most recent fiscal year for them, their earnings per share was roughly 85 cents. And unfortunately, we did see that huge kind of loss that they started to see in the last 2 quarters, mainly because of that over inventory correction. But we can see for the current fiscal year, they do expect earnings per share to be roughly $2.88. Jump into next fiscal year at the end of 2024, earnings per share is expected to be $4.28. And then the year after that, we expect $5.36. So again, we're seeing revenue growth, but we're also expected to see strong growth in their earnings. I do believe maybe earnings are a little bit closer to what might be expected. If AMD does beat this, I don't believe it's gonna be by much. So now I kind of pulled these numbers here on this quick Excel sheet, and I wanted to take a closer look at their earnings per share. The current price of AMD is actually what, 110. So let me just update that real quick, to kind of showcase $110 just to see where we're at in current PE ratio. So 110. So now when we update it to $110, which is the current price, we can see for the current year, PE ratio is roughly 38. And I don't believe that's crazy expensive for a company growing double digits and in an emerging market to some extent, especially with things like data centers and the AI. For earnings per share for the next fiscal year, so this would be the end of 2024, roughly 8 quarters from now. PE ratio is closer to 25. I personally enjoy that, right? 2 years, roughly 8 quarters from now, it's not too crazy. In a 25 PE ratio, I do see how this company can continue to grow. And this is if it meets analyst expectations. So obviously, if it beat analyst expectations, this could be a lot better. Earnings per share 2 fiscal years from now, we can kind of see PE ratios actually closer to 20. So overall, I don't think AMD is overly valued. I do believe anything over under 110, maybe even $100, this stock is still great. See if we bring it back down to 100, even current PE ratio, current calendar year PE ratio is going to drop down to 34, which I don't believe is insane. And we can see earnings per share 2 fiscal years would be all the way down to 18.7. So I do believe any time we can get this under 100, it's not a bad buy in my portfolio, right? Now let's continue looking at this company's fundamental. We can see that revenue in trailing 12 months has kind of gone up, right? We do see this nice growth. Unfortunately, we are seeing that, hey, this is a company that's spending a nice amount of money on things like research and development. Research and development is where this company's most operating expenses come from. At the same time, this company is developing numerous products. So we're going to look at the margins. If you look at, let's say we just look at research and development on its own, let me uncheck all of these. We can see a huge growth, right? If we take a closer look at normalized, it has grown roughly almost 200%, almost 3x in the past 3 years. But then when we take a closer look at revenue, right, you can see the huge difference there of, sure, hey, we can continue to see this research and development increase as long as you continue to get some leading products. Let's see what else I have here in things. We can see, right, gross margins, gross profit margins quarterly continue to be high. I do want to say 44% is not bad, especially for a hardware company. They do have niche markets like the data center, like the embedded markets, which tend to have higher gross profit margins. And I do believe that's one of the benefits from them. Unfortunately, right now, due to inventory corrections, right, we can see profit margins are down below, are on the negative side. But it does seem like on average, we can probably expect profit margins to probably be closer to that 20%. Next, I wanted to take a closer look at this company's buyback and average diluted shares. We can see buybacks are positive, right? There are quarters where they do some nice buybacks. Most recent quarter was 262 million. Unfortunately, right, one of the biggest problems that this company is due to an acquisition of Xilinx, the average diluted shares did increase dramatically. But I don't think this is necessarily a bad case, especially as we saw those PE ratios and that earnings per share has not really dwindled as much because Xilinx did come with positive cash flow, did come with positive earnings. All right, so now that we understand some of their financial numbers, I want to take a closer look at their segments, right? So AMD at the moment has 4 main segments. It has the data center market, and we're going to see how they have products within each of them. But the data center, here's where you see some of their server processors that go onto the big cloud providers like Microsoft, like Google Cloud, like Amazon AWS, and also maybe some enterprise users. There are tons of companies out there that run their own data centers and their own supercomputers, like Meta Platforms, for example. I believe Netflix also. So those are some of their customers here in the data center market. The client revenue, this is their server processors. These are their processors or their CPUs that go on desktops and laptops, right? If you have a desktop right now, there might be a chance that it might be an AMD CPU, or maybe your laptop is an AMD CPU. Now, if we take a closer look at the gaming revenue is made up of two main products. First is some semi-custom products. So AMD creates semi-custom chips, and these chips are go into things like the PlayStation, like the Xbox, and a lot of other handheld device games that are coming out right now. They also have their graphics cards, the GPUs, very similar to NVIDIA, and that is 1.8 billion. Next, we have the embedded market. The embedded market is all thanks to their Xilinx acquisitions. There's a lot of custom chips in here, FPGAs, accelerators, and we can see overall revenue breakdown. Data center market is 1.3 billion. Client revenue is 739 million in most recent quarter. Gaming revenue is 1.8. Embedded revenue is 1.6. So right now, this company definitely benefits from at least the data center and the embedded, and obviously the gaming revenue as well. The client market, we're going to take like we know, is taking a bit of a weakness, and we can see it is down year over year. So I want to say AMD did an amazing job in 2022 in kind of their analyst day, and they have, I want to say, over 10 presentations. Each 10 presentations have probably hundreds and hundreds of pages. I kind of highlighted maybe my top 3 or 4 presentations and some of my favorite pages within here. And some of the things that we're going to take a closer look at is first AMD, how they're kind of dealing in their data center market. And the data center market, like I mentioned, they do have numerous processors, and the processors are just like a car, right? You have numerous generation. The first generation, I believe, was Rome. The second generation, I forget. The third generation was Milan, and now we are in the fourth generation. Outside of that, so third generation was Milan. They also have server GPUs. These GPUs are very similar to like what NVIDIA has in forms of the hardware. Next, in the PC market, we do know, like I mentioned, they have your processors that go into the laptops. These are usually called mobile APUs. They're right now, I believe, in the 6000 series. And then in the consumers CPU, where if you're more of like a actual PC and the actual desktop, they have the Ryzen processors, and right now they are in the Ryzen 7000 series. Like I mentioned, in the gaming market, they have graphics cards very similar to NVIDIA. Then they also have those custom chips that go into, like I mentioned, the PlayStation, the Xbox, and a lot of handheld device games that are coming out right now. Let's see what else we have in here that might be interesting. Like I mentioned, the company did a few acquisitions recently. One of my favorite acquisitions was the Xilinx acquisition. This Xilinx acquisition gave them new opportunities because Xilinx is a leader in FPGAs. It brought them into where prior AMD was only focused in data center and in just maybe consumer goods. Now with Xilinx, they're hitting diversified markets like the wired and wireless 5G communications. They're hitting the automotive market, the aerospace, the defense, the industrial, the healthcare, the vision, the test and measurements, and the emulations. For example, if you're doing some form of automotive autonomous driving, right, you do need some smart chips. AMD, thanks to their Xilinx acquisition, creates some of those smart chips. So again, then they did another acquisition. The second acquisition was a smaller acquisition recently, and this was Pensando. Pensando is a big player in what is called the DPU, and this is a data processing unit. A DPU, what ends up doing is, let's say you have a server, right? You have a CPU. A CPU is pretty much the brain of a computer. And it's the brain of the computer. Whenever you get a task, your brain functions, right? And it functions really well. But sometimes you might have an overload, right? You might have certain tasks that you don't even need to use your brain anymore, that maybe some other part of your body can kind of do without your brain thinking, and you can kind of clear up the space in your brain to do even more important tasks. And that's what these DPUs do, right? They kind of clear the CPU from certain tasks, for example, networking, security, and storaging, and the brain doesn't need to do that, right? Because it's certain things that maybe that Pensando can do a lot better, and it goes like, hey brain, I'm going to take this workload off of you, I'm going to do it myself. Now you can focus on other things. Now that you're focusing on more important tasks, you become more efficient, you become better power efficient, and your performance increases over time. That's a great thing. And especially another great thing about these DPUs is when you have numerous chips, all you're able to kind of distribute that data to the right chip. And we know AMD has their CPUs, they have their GPUs, they have the DPUs, like I mentioned, they have FPGAs and other forms of accelerators. Here we can see the opportunity that AMD believes with the Xilinx acquisitions can grow, right? They believe it's $135 billion just with the acquisition. And in 2022, within the next 5 years, they do believe that total addressable market can increase to over 300 billion. A good portion of that is coming from the data center market, and we do know that's why AMD is really, really focused into data center space. The second is the PC market, and that's why AMD is really, really focused on kind of that consumer good products as well. Then the other ones all kind of share gaming, embedded, automotive, and communication. But we can see AMD in their main focus should number one be data center because that's the huge growth opportunity, and number two is the PC world. And in the data center market, we are seeing huge transformation. One of the biggest things is just the explosion of AI, but also still digitalization. We continue to see companies like Microsoft, like Amazon, like Google continue to expand their data center solutions. So here's another kind of nice piece of all the products that AMD kind of hits. Like I mentioned, they have the CPUs, this go on consumers and on data centers. They have the GPUs, these go on consumers and data centers. They do have numerous FPGA solutions and numerous kind of system on chips thanks to their Xilinx acquisitions. Then they also have smart NICs and DPUs thanks to their Pensando acquisition. So let's see if I have any other ones that I highlighted here. Nope. So now let's take a closer look at the next slide. And in this slide, they kind of talk a little bit about their leadership position and what makes them super strong. And one thing that we're seeing right now is called this chiplet architect and this chiplet integration, where right now it's getting difficult to make the whole chip smaller. So if you are in advanced products, right? You're teaming up with companies like TSMC, and you're having, right? You start off with the 10 nanometer CPU, now the 7 nanometer, next the 5 nanometer, next we're gonna see like the 3 nanometer, and the list goes down and lower and lower and lower. So what's happening right now is making these chips smaller gets a little bit extreme to some extent, and maybe sometimes you don't need to make the whole chip smaller. You just maybe need to make small processors within the chip smaller, and that's all the performance gains that you need. So that's what the chiplet integration is pretty much doing, is maybe you can have certain parts of the chip be maybe 7 nanometers, 10 nanometers, 5 nanometers, but just that true brain be super small. Maybe that'll be the 3 nanometer, and that's where you get all that performance. And now with this kind of Lego-like integration, you're able to kind of move on and continue to make your chips smaller. So AMD is a huge, huge player in chiplet integration. Many people say they might be one of the forerunners here. Let's continue to see here. They do have a lot of different product maps. In the CPU market, for example, they have their Zen, right? So Zen 2 came out in roughly 2019. Zen 3 came out in roughly 2020. Right now, we are in Zen 4 here in 2022. This is going to be kind of their the current Ryzen's that we're in right now, this is the 5 nanometer and the 4 nanometer, and we can see the next generation in CPU core map is going to be the Zen 5, and this is going to be the 4 nanometer and the 3 nanometer. I do want to say it's always great to continue to innovate. When you kind of get smaller, you become more power efficient. You're also getting better performance. There is usually a downside when you kind of come out with a new platform. So for example, let's say with the Zen 3, right, you have that 7 nanometer. Within the Zen 3, AMD kind of sometimes releases numerous products within there. Here, for example, they had the Zen 3, and then they had the Zen 3 with V-Cache. Because they are on that same platform, if you want to kind of change chips, you only really have to change the chips. But when you kind of upgrade to a new platform, let's say here with what they did with the Zen 4, because it becomes a smaller platform, you have to kind of upgrade numerous things. Like if you are a computer, let's say you're building your own computer, you have to change the whole motherboard and kind of start from scratch. And this also happens in the data center market. So when a new platform comes out, it takes some time before it ramps up because customers sometimes take their time into upgrading to the next platform, but once they have upgraded, it's easier for them to kind of grab even more and more customers. So we can see this is their CPU product core map. They also have, I do believe here we're going to see more of a GPU core map, but here we can talk a little bit more advanced packaging. If you have been watching the channel, you have known that there's something called advanced packaging that is very important to create a lot of these advanced chips. AMD is one that uses 2.5D and 3D hybrid bonding. And if you have been watching this channel, I did a previous, if you, obviously in this membership program, I have done a few deep dives. One of the few deep dives I did was on Bessie, and this is a company that produces semiconductor equipment that is needed for this type of packaging. So advanced packaging is very, very crucial for AMD and its future. Here, for example, they talk a little bit about some of their packaging architectures, how in 2019 they were already doing the chiplet design. Now they were doing, in 2021, they were doing more of 3D stacking, and now they're also doing more of 2.5D. In the future, they're going to continue to do a lot of this multi-architecture, heterogeneous architecture in the semiconductor market. AMD though, continuing in, when you have so many chips and you have so many different products, you want them to communicate really well with each other. And AMD does that really well with what they call the infinity architecture. And this is if you have an AMD CPU, if you have an AMD GPU, if you have an AMD DPU, or any of other AMD products, the architecture that AMD has to communicate with each other is better. So in theory, this is usually like a small moat that most semiconductor companies do where, hey, if you buy my products, if you buy my CPU and you buy my GPU, you're going to get probably better performance opposed to buying maybe a third-party GPU. That's not necessarily the case, but it is kind of creating that opportunity where as we continue to go on, maybe that moat gets a little bit stronger and stronger. So next, which is the other slide, I wanted to take a closer look. This is more looking at AMD's GPU market. So in the GPU market, like I mentioned, they're pretty much used in two main players. The gaming market, they're also used in the data center market, which is pretty much the supercomputer. Or supercomputers as well. So here, if we take a closer look, I do want to kind of scroll down to their architecture. So for the gaming market, they have what is called the RDNA architecture. And the RDNA, right now, we are sitting in 5 nanometers. So AMD is in RDNA 3. RDNA 4 is expected to come out maybe a year or 2 years from now. Now, focusing on the CPU market, they do have what is called CDNA. And the CDNA, this is, for example, the AMD Instincts, which are the GPUs that go onto the data center market. Right now, we are expected to hit CDNA 3. That is going to be the MI300 at 5 nanometers. And over here, we can kind of see how the CDNA 3 is going to be a huge performance boost over the CDNA 2. The company believes that it will be over 5x AI performance per watt uplift. Another thing that's very important with these products, right, is software implementation. And AMD is doing the best it can to really kind of create some form of software platform for its GPU market. The software platform that they call is ROCm. And we have learned a little bit over the past few quarters that this company is accelerating its software stack to combat the players like NVIDIA, who have a very, very strong software market in this space. Let's see what else I have here for you guys for the GPU market. Not too much. Now let's take a closer look at the server CPU. So I mentioned like the server CPU. The first one was Naples, not Rome. So the first one was Naples. Second generation was Rome. Third generation was Milan. And the fourth generation is Genoa. And we can see when this company first came out with Naples, the company barely had any solutions, only 50 plus solutions. Second generation, the market started to appreciate AMD. They had over 500 solutions. The third generation came out, Milan, they had over 1,000 solutions. And now there are in the fourth generation. I do believe they're going to continue this momentum. Like I mentioned, for them, the opportunity for the data center in CPU alone is super huge, roughly 42 billion just on CPU market alone. Here we can see that they have numerous solutions. Like I mentioned, right now we are in the fourth generation EPYC CPU. So for the general purpose, they have Genoa. But just like anything in the world, there's always niche markets, right? And AMD, what they're doing is they're creating special flavors of CPUs to hit different special niche. So if you are more of a cloud native company, you might have more cloud native workloads, something like maybe a Meta platforms, you're going to use the Bergamo instead. If you want to use more technical, maybe more simulations and stuff, you're most likely going to use Genoa X. If you need more telecommunication stuff, you're most likely using Sienna. And these are, right now, we're going to see Genoa is out right now. Bergamo, I believe, just got released. Genoa X just got released, and we're probably going to see Sienna later on in this year. We can see that this company does have the next fifth generation EPYC CPU coming out later in 2024. So here we can kind of see how different solutions are important, and that's where they're creating different flavors. The great thing is usually they're kind of matching the platform. So let's say I am a CPU, a cloud provider. I can kind of mix and match. Let's say I want to have a Genoa, but later on I want to upgrade to a Genoa X or kind of switch off to a Bergamo. I will be able to do that. Kind of talking, I did have a slide here kind of talking about AMD, and AMD's global server CPU market shares top 25%. And I think this is insane. So now a quarter of the global server CPUs are AMD products. And this kind of just showcase how strong their technology is and how they're kind of outperforming at least the big players like Intel. Um, so like I mentioned, right, the company, we recently did have an update on June 13th of 2023. Remember, that analyst presentation was about a year ago, so I want to kind of bring up some recent news. On June 13th, AMD announced that, hey, look, the Genoa fourth generation EPYC processor Genoa is doing amazing, and they are releasing the new generations, which is going to be Milan, which is going to be, Genoa X, and Bergamo, right? So those AMD announced those new solutions, and then also AMD continues to introduce more GPU products. They did mention that the MI300 is expected to come out in the quarter 3 and quarter 4 of this year. So if you are excited about the AI market, AMD definitely has some pretty interesting solutions. They also mentioned the strength that they are doing with their ROCm platform, which that is their software platform, to continue to improve their overall software ecosystems for data center accelerators. What else do we have here? I wanted to take a closer look at AMD and more of kind of the best sellers in Amazon. We can see AMD is the number one bestseller CPU processor right now, even though it is their previous generation. But then we can see number 4, number 5, and 6 are also AMD. Number 8 and number 9, number 10, 11, and 12 are also all AMD products. Unfortunately, right now we are seeing kind of a weakness in the consumer space. So right now, obviously the previous generation is cheaper, and that's why it tends to do a little bit better. But we can see here number 5 is actually their new generation, the 7000 series. If we take a closer look at graphics cards, unlike AMD in the CPU market, AMD is really dominating to some extent versus Intel. In the GPU market, AMD is still losing to NVIDIA, but we can see number 4 and number 5 are AMD products, so it's not like they're completely obsolete. We can see that the market still has those as top selling at the moment. So, like I mentioned, right, data center market, this is where this company is mainly is driven by the EPYC server CPUs. Client revenue, this is mainly by their consumer CPUs, which are these, the Ryzen 7000 series. The gaming revenue, this is a mixture of revenue coming in from what I mentioned, like their graphics cards, but it's also the chips that they sell to Microsoft and to Sony for the PlayStation and for the Xbox. The embedded market, that's more of their FPGAs, which are used for a variety of markets, like the automotive, like the embedded market as well. I do want to say, right, that right now the market is a little bit weak. I just wanted to take a closer look at their most recent earnings. We are seeing that right now the data center market is flat. This is something that macroeconomics, we are seeing a bit of a slowdown, even by the big players. This is, in my opinion, going to pick back up once everything turns around. The client market net revenue is down 65%. Again, we are seeing the weakness in consumer spending. When that turns around, I do believe we're going to start to see growth here, and we're also going to start to see growth in operating income. Gaming net revenue, very similar to the consumer market. I do expect more growth in the future, especially if maybe in the next 2 to 3 years we get the next generation games. The embedded market, this is one of their biggest players, one of their biggest margin players as well. Almost 50% operating income here. I do believe this is also going to continue to grow as we see more advancements in things like automotive, like healthcare, like telecommunication. So before I end this episode, what I want to do is just take a closer look at their most recent earnings call and just share some of the highlights that AMD mentioned during the call. So first, they did mention that recently, in their most recent earnings, which was about 3 months ago, to execute on their broad AI strategy and significantly accelerate this key part of their business, they brought together multiple AI teams from across the company into a single organization. So we can see AMD is definitely trying to focus in the AI market, and they are doing this by creating a single organization within there. So that's great. Like I mentioned, the PC market is still pretty good. AMD does mention that looking at the year, they continue to expect the PC total addressable market to be down approximately 10%. But they do expect this to kind of grow in the second quarter and to be a seasonally stronger second half of the year. So we do expect some growth here to kind of pick back up. They did mention that in their embedded market, they still see strong growth across things like industrial, vision, healthcare, test and emulation, communication, aerospace and defense, and their automotive customers in a variety of semiconductor solutions from their FPGAs and from their system on chips, and even their DPUs and software. For example, they did mention that in the automotive, for example, they are providing solutions for high-end ADAS and AI features, and that grew in the quarter, and they highlighted by Subaru rolling out its AMD-based EyeSight 4 platform across their full range of vehicles. So we can see AMD is still growing in other markets, even though the embedded market doesn't get much love. I do believe it's very, very bullish for the company as well. The company also remains confident in their ability to grow in the second half of the year, driven by adoption of their SAN4 product portfolio, and also with the upcoming lines like the MI300, which is going to be an accelerator for high-performance computing. So like I mentioned, I mean, I don't think AMD is one that's crazily overvalued. I do believe maybe if we can get it below $100, that would be very, very attractive. But even right now at 110, we were looking at those PE ratios. I don't think things look half bad. So I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive on AMD. Like I mentioned, tomorrow I will be doing more of like a earnings overview on TSMC, something that I'm not releasing in my main channel, but I do believe it's very important for semiconductor investors. So I hope you guys enjoy. Take care. Have a good day, and see you next time.